So for our next talk, we have Sheldon Smith. Sheldon is a senior hydrologist with Stantec Consulting in Kitchener here. He has a great deal of experience working on engineered wetlands. And he's going to tell us about engineered wetlands, where we are and where we're going. It is working. Okay, good. Yeah, so that way, and this button should work, the advance now, and that is your pointer. Yeah.
Hi everyone. Happy World Wetlands Day. Happy Chinese New Year. My name is Sheldon Smith. I'm a consultant with Stantec Consulting, and I actually work out of the Markham office. I am a former grad student of Waterloo, proud former grad student of Waterloo. And I'm also here with a friend I want to give a shout out to right now, a colleague of mine from Stantec, Jim Higgins, who has been a great promoter and champion for engineered wetlands and a mentor to me in many ways. So I'd like to acknowledge you, Jim. What we're going to talk about today are engineered wetlands. And engineered wetlands are to be distinguished from other forms of wetlands. Essentially three groups: created wetlands, which we conceptually think of restoring an actual functioning wetland that serves a habitat-like purpose. And then a constructed wetland, which is a treatment wetland, certain type of treatment wetland. And then an engineered wetland is an advanced form of constructed wetland. So constructed treatment wetlands are human constructed. And like I just mentioned, they're built and designed specifically for the removal of a contaminant or a group, a suite of contaminants. They utilize a wide variety of removal processes, and they're not designed to fully recreate a function or process of habitat, per se. They're passive in that, generally speaking, they do not have any moving parts. So water moves through them by gravity, okay? There are three basic kinds of engineered wetlands. The most basic kind, the earliest version that was utilized, is like a pond wetland, right? An open water surface wetland. The second would be what we call a free water surface wetland. So that's an open basin again, but perhaps with a fully planted or fully vegetated surface, a free water surface wetland. And then the third type is what we call a subsurface flow wetland. Now, subsurface flow wetlands direct water to the subsurface, okay? So in the evolution of constructed wetland design, what we see is our evolution has occurred over several different areas in wetland design. So we've gone from kinds of basins or cells, from this open water concept or pond concept to free water surface to a subsurface flow environment. Subsurface flow wetlands, by the way, are very important in northern climates because it's the key to making the system function during the cold. Single cell to multi-cell and then to multi-train type systems. Their morphology has evolved from irregular cells to more rectilinear cells, high aspect ratios to low aspect ratios. Sizing methods have evolved from empirical methods to methods that are now really sizing based on reaction kinetics. And their engineering design has evolved significantly from really an ad hoc type of approach to more formal civil and chemical engineering methods. And even now, more recently, which we'll talk about later, advancement into DNA sequencing and DNA identification of microbial communities that do particular functions. So what we have here is an example of a subsurface flow constructed wetland. So you have an inlet structure that controls flow into the system. And then typically what you have is some sort of inflow distribution system. You have, in this case, this is a horizontal flow system. You have a planting substrate. The water level is below the planting substrate. And then you have your media through which you are directing the water. Now, that treatment media can take many, many different forms. Gravel, sand, soil, compost, biosolids. There's a wide range of things that can be used in the media, and that media is designed for the particular cocktail that you're treating. And then an effluent control system. That effluent control system will ultimately control the water level in here in the system. So conventional constructed wetland strengths and weaknesses. Constructed wetlands are great at removing biochemical oxygen demand. They do quite well at reducing suspended solids concentrations, particulate heavy metals, bacteria, viruses, oils, grease, and many light organics. Their weaknesses have to do with their ability to remove nutrients and many dissolved ions, coping with highly variable flow rates, and coping with very high flow rates, especially if those high flow rates are associated with a more dilute or lower concentration contaminant load. And then they have difficulty cleaning up recalcitrant wastewaters. So engineered wetlands, if we think of them as an advancement or the next step in the evolution of constructed wetlands, are a new advanced secondary wastewater treatment natural system technology. And they're designed for year-round operation. They are essentially cells connected to form an EW process system. Their conditions can be manipulated and controlled. They can be designed to do different things in different cells. And they can have much higher pollutant removal levels than constructed wetlands, and in many cases, conventional mechanical wastewater treatment plants. The engineered wetland field has a lot to, it owes a lot to essentially made in Canada, actually made in Ontario processes. One of the biggest initial engineered wetland projects was the BREW project, which stands for Bio Reactor Engineered Wetland, which was a cooperative between government, universities, and a number of private consulting firms here in Ontario. And it piloted and demo scaled aerated wetlands for the treatment of a number of different kinds of wastes. So its targets were ammonia and phosphorus removal, and some recalcitrant wastewaters as well, such as landfill leachates, It treated some leachates from the Keel Valley landfill. It aerated some cells, and it used some of these new engineered substrates in others. And this brew project, which was a project in the late 90s, was very successful and spawned a number of proprietary technologies. Engineered wetland types. So engineered wetlands are usually differentiated into aerobic systems and anaerobic systems. Aerobic systems, the most basic of which is this brew type system, which is an aerated system. It's relatively simple. A further advancement in aerobic systems is the submerged attached growth bioreactors, which are particularly designed for nitrification. And then we have fill and drain engineered wetlands, which use pulse flow, sometimes tidal environments. Essentially, stormwater engineered wetlands, which we'll talk about a bit later, are fill and drain type systems. Aerobic. Anaerobic engineered wetlands. We have denitrification bioreactors, which remove nitrates. We have SAPS bioreactors, which are successive alkalinity producing systems. So they treat acid rock drainage without iron 3 or hydrolysis and plugging. This is a big problem in mining. Is while the mine is operating, usually the funding is available to do advanced wastewater treatment, mine runoff treatment. But when the mine closes, this becomes a problem because the mine is no longer a revenue-generating business unit. So the use of engineered wetlands to deal with mine runoff is both a critical and very promising technology because these systems are very low maintenance and low energy input systems. And their ability to remove some of the key parameters that cause problems in mine runoff is important. Biochemical reactors, they convert metals and metalloids into insoluble sulfides and other precipitates. And then we have this last form, which are specialty bioreactors. And these are highly unique to their particular waste stream. An example of that is a selenium reduction bioreactor. So here we've got a table, a periodic table of treatable elements that can be treated in bioreactors / engineered wetlands. All right, what we're going to do now is just compare constructed wetland and engineered wetland performance. Remember that an engineered wetland is taking that constructed wetland, and essentially you're adding things. You're adding oxygen, you're adding energy, you're engineering the substrate to do particular things. Okay? In some cases, you're even adding an electrical current to do those things. So again, we talked about biochemical oxygen demand. Constructed wetlands can do, let's say a moderate improvement in BOD to a very strong improvement in BOD. Engineered wetlands really take that to another level in their ability to significantly reduce biochemical oxygen demand. Similar with suspended solids, constructed wetlands can have moderate removal abilities versus quite significant abilities, whereas engineered wetlands take that to another level. We really start to see a major differentiation when we get into some of the nutrients and other parameters. Like for instance, total kilojoule nitrogen, we have moderate removal in a constructed wetland versus we have very high rates of removal in a properly designed, maintained, and operated engineered wetland. Total phosphorus, same concept. We go from really average performance to quite significant performance. And the story goes on. So an engineered wetland system is perhaps best conceptualized as we would think about a very typical mechanical wastewater treatment plant. They bring together primary, secondary, and tertiary treatment in many cases. Okay? So in the primary phase, the wetlands often incorporate a sedimentation system. That could be something as basic as a sedimentation pond. We've used oil grit separators as sedimentation cells. So in most cases, when you're dealing with a waste stream that has a high particulate load, a high TSS load, then you need to have a cell or a phase before it gets to that engineered wetland that will take down that particulate. And the reason is it's a wetland. So you're moving water in most instances through a media. And you don't want that media to clog and to end up forming preferential pathways or limiting the ability for water to move through that media. So that's your primary treatment phase. Secondary treatment is really where the engineered wetland comes in. And they're often done in a single, but more commonly, multi-cell system, where the cells take the stream through a variety of processes. We may be going from anaerobic to aerobic processes, or vice versa. And in other instances, we have perhaps multiple trains occurring at the same time. And then finally, we have tertiary treatment. And often what that entails is we may be back to a polishing pond or a free water surface wetland. We often put constructed wetlands as the last step in the process of engineered wetland systems because we need a polishing system or a sedimentation system. And of course, you can add disinfection if it's required. Here's some different types of configurations. We've got downflow vertical systems, we've got upflow vertical systems, and we have horizontal systems. Here's just some of the different engineered wetland cell options. Again, we talked about, in some cases where you have a high particulate load entering in your waste stream, you need to have something to do sedimentation before that wastewater reaches your engineered wetland. And we've used oil grit separators, like I've said, sedimentation ponds, etc. This is what a free water constructed wetland cell typically looks like. Pond cell, again, it's an open water feature. We talked about these successive alkalinity producing systems. What these systems do is essentially what they do is they deoxygenate the water. So they remove to a very low level the dissolved oxygen. That's typically microbially mediated. And then often what they'll do, they're very, very commonly used in iron removal at mine sites. The water will then move through a limestone bed where ARD, acid rock drainage, is neutralized. And then subsequently they can be moved to a biochemical reactor where their sulfate can be reduced. So that would be an example of a treatment train type system. There are a wide variety of successful applications of engineered wetlands. Probably the most common and some of the earliest was private and municipal wastewater. You know, when it comes to the treating of private and municipal wastewater, wetlands have been in use since there was wastewater. We all recognize the value of wetlands in improving water quality. I saw that someone was doing some research on Cootes Paradise. You know, we essentially developed this constructed wetland science and the engineered wetland science through observing what happens in nature. For instance, the Cootes Paradise wetland has been treating the runoff, the discharge from the Dundas wastewater treatment plant since 1919, although it's a natural wetland. And those kinds of observations of the improvement in water quality that a wetland can achieve led to this growth in the field of using wetland science to deal with human wastewater problems. Landfill leachate is another really big field for engineered wetland design. Landfill leachate can be extremely recalcitrant and has a lot of sometimes nasty things that are difficult to treat. Another highly developed field is that of treating aircraft de-icing fluid. So what we have here is a wetland in Edmonton at the Edmonton International Airport. And then here we have a large-scale engineered wetland at the Buffalo Niagara International Airport. Both of these are designed to treat aircraft de-icing fluid, so glycol, ethylene glycol. Mine tailings, as we've talked about, waste rock, open pit, underground effluent. These systems are really ideally suited when designed properly to deal with mine effluent. A wide range of industrial effluents, contaminated groundwater, agricultural drainage, and stormwater. Some future directions. How are we doing on time? A couple of minutes? 5 minutes? Okay. What I want to do is just spend a moment talking about future directions for engineered wetlands. One of those is some happenings in research and development, and then also in stormwater management. So as you can imagine, engineered wetlands are typically designed and constructed in several phases. It often starts on paper, where someone attempts to do some reaction kinetics and just kind of go through in a paper exercise to some level of proof of concept. From there, typically goes to a treatability phase, and the treatability phase often entails two things. One would be a lab scale bench test. These are often quite small, maybe 1 square meter, 2-3 square meters. And then from that, once you get lab scale results, you have the ability to do some scaling factors to a field or a demonstration scale. After a demonstration scale project is done, you then have actually full size or field scale factors with which you can size and configure your engineered wetland. Here's some examples of lab engineered wetland projects. One of the very exciting things that's happening right now is advancements in engineered wetlands with respect to genomics. So there's a grant that's been issued by the Ontario Genomics Institute to examine the DNA of the microbial communities that exist in various types of engineered wetlands. So iron-reducing bacteria and iron-oxidizing bacteria, sulfate-reducing bacteria, and acid-producing bacteria. So it's important to know, especially for us in a northern climate, which of these species of bacteria function best under our unique climate conditions, and how long does it take them to migrate or to build a community as the water temperature changes through the year. That's what we hope to discover through this genomics research exercise. And then finally, stormwater. We've in the last couple of years, we've been involved in the design of a couple of stormwater engineered wetlands, one in Aurora, Ontario, and another in Uxbridge. And these are quite simple systems. They are downflow, vertical engineered wetlands. They have essentially a gravel substrate, and they used essentially attached biological growth to do the majority of the stormwater quality improvement.
Thank you very much, Sheldon. So we have a scheduled break from 10:45 until 11 o'clock with coffee in the fishbowl, and there are posters set up there as well. But stay in here if you do have a few questions for Sheldon on engineered wetlands.
So my question is, do you know if these engineered systems, wetland systems, are also used widely in other countries, like worldwide?
Yes, yes. So they're used around the world. They're used very widely in Europe and North America, and expertise in the form of both art and science, know-how and know-what, is disseminating throughout the world. So they are in use around the world, for sure.
You mentioned Cootes Paradise. Dundas had its sewage plant since 1919, as you indicated, probably one of the first in Canada. And it was, I think the involvement of Cootes Paradise was largely accidental, that it was there before the people. And when the town of Dundas got established, it needed a sewage plant, and somebody had the foresight to go ahead and do it years and years before many other centers. And Cootes Paradise has been paying the price ever since, frankly. I'm concerned that is something that's happening with these wetland treatment systems, in that natural wetlands are being abused. They were never intended for this purpose, and when you start loading them up with things that nature never intended to have in that system, the system has evolved and developed on the basis that those weren't going to be present. There's kind of a tendency to claim those wetland benefits as part of a treatment system, because after all, some waterfowl are coming in and it must be compatible with the treatment use. I think that's a misconception. Often your engineered wetland, as you indicated, is intended to remove contaminants, but they don't leave the system necessarily. They're probably still in there, and waterfowl, for example, can move in, spend some time, pick them up, take them away, and you never have an indication of what the harm is that's happening to those. Those critters may fly over the hill and die. And I think that's a part of the engineered wetland consideration that really hasn't been considered yet.
So just back to this idea of these vertical flow systems. The most modern vertical flow systems often have essentially no wetland vegetation on their surface. In many cases, such as the case of that Buffalo Niagara engineered wetland, the surface was actually seeded with a transportation grass mix, right? So anyone looking at that wetland would never know it's a wetland. All the activity occurs below surface, right? So that's an instance where we're mitigating those potential effects that you refer to with respect to waterfowl. A key thing about engineered wetlands with respect to vegetation is that in an engineered wetland, the assumption is that you have available power. And instead of using wetland vegetation to supply oxygen, you typically will use actually an aeration system to supply the oxygen. So therefore, in an engineered wetland system, you may not need wetland plants in that instance.
One more.
When you show the table with the removal efficiencies, I mean, it all was 99%, 99%, so you could say, well, we're done, we're finished. But so maybe you want to comment on the fact that there's, of course, a lot of concern about emerging contaminants, so new contaminants being released in the environment.
That's correct, yeah.
So what's the research?
Yeah, so there's a significant amount of research happening in essentially more recalcitrant types of parameters with pharmaceuticals and complex chemical structures. Again, what's happening is that the system becomes more and more engineered, right, and begins to look less like a wetland, right, and more like some sort of natural treatment system, some bioreactor, which essentially is what it is, right? Engineered wetlands, like we've said, are not meant to create wetlands that are used for habitat, form, or function. But what they are is they're taking what we've learned about wetlands and incorporating that into a naturally based treatment system.
Thank you very much. We'll take a break now for coffee, bathroom break, and we'll resume at 11 in this room. And we'd like to thank you as well.
Thank you.